Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Time Management Tools webinar. I'm having a little bit of a technology glitch. I'm going to let you guys see me. Hi. I just want to point out a couple things on the right-hand side of your menu. You'll be able to have a chat bar, and if you can hear me okay, go ahead and type hello in the chat bar. And we're waiting just for a couple more people to join. So just want to make sure I can hear everybody and you guys are familiar with the chat menu. So I can currently see that we've got Cindy, Vince, and Brad on. Can everybody hear me all right? Go ahead and type in the chat menu if you can hear me. And I'll wait a couple minutes until we get a few more people online. So if you can all hear me, go ahead and click to the right hand menu and click on the chat bar, and then I can hear, then I know that you all can actually hear me. And I'm just waiting for a few more people to join, and we'll get started in just a couple of minutes. Hi, everyone. Please go ahead and say hello on the chat menu. Thanks, Brad, for letting me know. Are you guys all together in one room, so it's one computer? Brad and Vince, can you guys hear me? Hi, Brad. Good. I'm glad you can hear me. And you guys are all together. So just waiting for a couple more minutes. And I'm going to check one other thing for some people that are having some difficulties. So it's about 12:07 right now, which is kind of a late start. I apologize for having this new system that definitely has some glitches, but I'll give it just 1 or 2 more minutes and then we'll be able to get started. Brad, do you know where Vince went? He was on, and I don't know if he got kicked off or something else happened. Oh, Vince is back. Okay. So I have one person just coming to join us, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So I'm going to, apparently if I do the presentation where I'm showing the slides to you guys, it kicks it off into both monitors. And since some of you do IT, maybe you can help me afterwards. So what you're going to look at in terms of the screen is not going to be the presentation in presentation mode, but you guys will still be able to see the slides. So a couple things I just want to go through. I want to first welcome everybody here to the webinar on time management. I'm not surprised that we're getting started just a tad late, considering it's time management. That always seems to happen. But I do want to welcome everybody, and I want to go over a couple webinar guidelines just to get you all familiar with this actual system. First off, Brad, I know that you can already see the tabs across the top, and that's where the chat menu is going to be. So throughout the webinar, I'd like you guys to be able to type in any questions that you have, any comments that you might have. We're going to do a brief introduction in just a couple minutes. So if you want to go ahead and start typing in your responses now, if you could please put in your name, say hello to everybody, and then what is one thing that you want to achieve from today's class. Do make sure that your speakers are on so that you all can hear me properly. And I want to let you know that this webinar is actually being recorded off Google's Hangout. And since you registered online, as soon as this is complete, it will email you a link and you can watch this again if you'd like to, or share it with other people. I'd recommend that you share it with other people before I actually post it and make it available for purchase after the fact. So let's go ahead and start with some of the introductions. We have a few people on the webinar today, and then next week there may be a couple additional people, and then some additional people the week after that. So let's just do a quick round of introductions. Brad, I know that you're typing. Hi, Eleanor. I'm glad you were able to make it and get on with the actual link. I'm not sure why it didn't email you a link after you registered, but you have it now. And so for those of you that are actually on the system right now, this is the same link that you're going to use next week and the week following. And like I said, you'll get emailed to you a copy of this recording so you can listen to it afterwards. So Brad, Eleanor, anything that you want to comment on what you want to achieve for today so I can make sure that I actually have that answered for you? Thanks, Brad. I'm glad you look forward to getting the link afterwards. So Eleanor, Brad, and Brad's little group there, anything you guys want to make sure I cover for today? There may be a delay too, so if it looks like I'm speaking another language as the voice is coming out, sometimes on Google Hangouts it's a weird type of link, a weird type of delay. So Eleanor said, I'm sick of always feeling like there's too much to do, and I'm shoving 10 pounds of meat into a 5-pound sausage casing. That's a very good description there, Eleanor. So one of the things that we'll talk about over the next few weeks is how do you prioritize your activities and how can you be more productive in the things that you do. Today, in particular, we're going to focus on prioritizing. So hopefully once you prioritize, you'll realize out of the 10 pounds, maybe only 2 pounds are really that important, and it'll make your days be a little better. And then Brad said he'd like to learn to be more productive and better able to manage our time. So that's great. Let's dive into a couple of key elements that we'll actually take a look at. The main objective for today is actually, the main objective across all three is to go through specific tips and tools. Time management is one of those things that we can look at in terms of a theory, but I would much prefer you guys to walk out with something tangible so that you can immediately apply it and see the benefits of managing your time appropriately. So the whole focus of each session is going to be on practical applications of things that you'll be able to do so that you can actually better manage your time. A quote that I actually like is, "There's nothing so useless as doing efficiently that which should not be done at all." And that's going to kind of launch us into today in thinking about in terms of productivity and pace, which is what our focus is today, what are the things that you're doing that you should be doing? And what are the things that you are doing that maybe you don't need to be doing? So before we dive into how to appropriately manage your time, and I'm going to ask you guys to put some responses in the chat menu for this as well. But time management, I believe, is actually about how we manage ourselves. We often talk a lot about time as if it's some concrete type element that we just need to get our hands around. And in reality, time management is really about the choices that we make throughout the day and where we choose to actually focus our time and energy. So what I'd like you to think about is, if you actually had more time, what would you do with the additional time? So if I said to you, you could get an extra 10 hours a week, what would you do with the extra 10 hours? And the reason why this is important, because you want to begin to implement these time management tools and then see the benefit of having the extra time. If you don't plan on what you would do with the extra time, you'll end up filling in the time with just random type things, and you'll still feel like you're a hamster going around on a wheel. So if you had 10 extra hours a week, what would you guys do with that extra 10 hours? In my case, it would probably be sleep and something a little bit more relaxing. So for you guys, go ahead and type in your answers. An extra 10 hours in the week, what would you actually do? What would you do with that extra 10 hours that would allow you to be more fulfilled and more excited about your life? Eleanor, Brad, any comments? I'll wait a minute because I think we're on a lag. If you could manage your time appropriately and you had an extra 10 hours, which is almost like an extra work day, what would you do with that extra time? All right, I hope you guys can still hear me okay. I'm not seeing any of the chats in terms of what you guys would do with the extra time. There you go, Brad. I would focus on improvements of processes already in place. You know, that's a really interesting comment. One of the things that I've talked to people about is, if you're so busy doing all day and you're just running around doing all these different types of things, you don't really have a chance to stop and do some planning and think about additional processes and ways that you could streamline things, even think about things that you would enjoy doing more. So that would be a good use of time. Eleanor says, I'm a hamster, and if I had another 10 hours, I would work more, and I would finish many of the projects that are sitting on your desk. That is one of the things that we're going to talk about today, Eleanor, is a lot of the projects that we end up putting on our to-do list, on things that we feel like we have to do. Sometimes once they've made it on the list, we feel like we have to do them because they're on the list. But if you really evaluate what's most important, you'll find that some of those things aren't really that important. Nicole would like to spend more time with their family. That's a big one. A lot of times people would feel that if they weren't pressured so often and they could get done what they need to get done, they would actually enjoy their lives a little bit more, spend more time with the family, even take more vacations, travel a little bit more. So that's really important, because you have to be sufficiently motivated to want to be able to make some changes so that you can see the benefit of doing that. So as we go through some of these activities, realize for yourself that you're wanting to become more efficient and effective on how you manage your time, because the benefit of that is you'll feel a greater sense of satisfaction that you're getting things done. You'll have more opportunities to spend time with your family and any other things that you all might come up with. So thanks for sharing that. Let me just talk a little bit about the mindset in terms of time management. Time management, I mentioned, has to do with your choices, but it's actually a skill set. And a lot of times people wonder where their time actually goes. It becomes very fleeting. And the way that you learn the appropriate skill set is first to recognize the counterproductive habits that you have, and then begin to replace those with new habits. I know in school now, I volunteer as a guardian ad litem, and there's a little boy that I see. He's about 6, and he started school this year, and they gave him a little planner. And in the planner, they're already beginning to teach people how to manage their time. And on the side is a little to-do list where they put out what their projects are that they need to manage. I was actually really happy to see that, because we need to start teaching our kids how to make good choices with their time early on. And I actually had another client who, her daughter, she would wake her daughter up in the morning, and then her daughter would wake up, fall back to sleep, get up again, fall back to sleep. And so it was just this crazy ordeal in the morning, trying to get her kid ready and then dropping her off to daycare. And so we created a plan where she could get her daughter to manage herself in the morning. And if she got up in the morning and they made it into the car by 7 a.m., the daughter would get a sticker. And if she got a sticker, if she got X amount of stickers throughout the week, then she would end up getting a prize. And as soon as she implemented that system, it worked like a charm. And so now the daughter jumps up. The daughter actually puts stickers on the board the night before, because she's committed that she's going to get up and make sure that she earns all of her stickers. And what's really funny is the reinforcement schedule for a little girl with stickers is actually not that different than what we need as people. We just have to recognize for ourselves what we need to stop doing, what we need to start doing, and how we want to reinforce ourselves so we stay motivated in doing that. So that's a couple of things that we're going to spend some time talking about today. First thing we want to do in order to recognize counterproductive habits is really listen to ourselves as we actually talk about time. One of the things I hear people say, and I actually catch myself say this a lot too, is, I don't have time. If only I had more time. Gee, where has all the time gone? Time just got away from me. I liked what you said, Eleanor, when I spoke to you earlier today, which got me thinking, is for somebody who is juggling with time management, if you say that's, we have a meeting in 45 minutes, that seems like a long time away. For other people, they actually start fretting about the 45 minutes, the entire 45 minutes they have. So they end up wasting time because they're nervous about what's upcoming. So start thinking about, even to get here today, how you managed your time throughout the day, and whether you've said things like, if only I had more time, and I can't believe how quickly time is going. That's because we're not completely aware and in the present moment to be able to manage our time appropriately, so we feel like we don't have any control over it. If you did start thinking to yourself, I'm completely responsible for how I spend my time, I can manage my time differently and get better results, I'm in charge of my time, nobody else is, and I'm not the victim, you would have a sense of empowerment that you could manage your time far more effectively, and it wouldn't seem like this thing that you're trying to grab a hold of. So if you really look at how you manage your day is a function of the choices you make, then you're 100% responsible for what your day ends up looking like. Now, if you have clients that are expecting things from you in terms of customers, or if you have a boss, I know some people where they have a boss that changes their mind every half hour or every hour in terms of what the priority is and what somebody needs to be working on, and so they feel that they can never get caught up. All of those things will actually happen to us. There'll be pressures all day long about demands that people are going to put on us. But if we're truly going to be responsible for our own time, then we have to take a look at how are we communicating to other people, what boundaries are we setting for other people, and also what are we setting for ourselves. So let's take a quick look at what the pain of ineffective time management is actually costing you. I know this is true for me. The minute I get overwhelmed, the first thing to go is I stop going to the gym. I feel like that's one other appointment that I just don't have time. That's what I say. I don't have time to actually go there. But if I manage my day properly and I create the gym as a priority, I would always make time for that. So go through these and see if any of these apply to you. And feel free to type in the chat the impact that this is having on you right now. If you feel like there's no time for exercise, if you feel like even if you've gotten 8 hours of sleep, you still wake up and you're tired, that's because you're not giving yourself a chance to actually rest in between. We'll talk about that in a little while as well. If you don't have time to cook, even sit down for dinner, more and more now people start eating at their desks, so they don't even stop to take a break and actually eat, or they're eating in their cars, going through fast food restaurants. A big one is when you're so caught up on all the things that you have to do and feeling completely overwhelmed, you'll actually lose track of how you feel. And if you're anxious about something, if you're angry about something, all of those feelings will actually roll up into how you're processing a task that you're working on. And a lot of times that creates a heaviness at work. And if you can identify how you feel and begin to recognize that, you'll find that you're far more productive in how you manage your time. You can ignore the needs of other people. I would catch myself doing this a lot. I thought I was being very efficient. And so I would schedule meetings back to back to back. And then I would give myself just enough time to get from one meeting over to the next meeting. And although I thought I was being efficient, if something went wrong in that particular moment, if there was traffic, if there was a car accident, if one little thing went out of whack, it would throw my schedule off. And then I would get frustrated. I would get angry because I felt like I was always running late. And I felt like I had set my schedule to be as efficient as I could and everybody else was messing it up. When in reality, I wasn't giving myself enough time in between appointments. And now that I've changed that and I recognize that about myself, I actually schedule extra time in between. And then there's what's called the waiting game. So I bring things to keep myself busy so I don't feel like I'm wasting time. Part of the reason why I used to always run late is I felt like if I showed up early, I was wasting too much time. So that's one of the things that you can take a look at for yourself as well. Another pain inventory is whether or not you feel like you're getting really irritable. I know if I'm really busy and I'm in the middle of handling something and somebody interrupts me, I don't have near as much patience as I normally would if I felt like I was on track with things. You may also find that you're quick to anger, or there's a sense of loneliness when you feel completely overwhelmed. So are any of you experiencing any of these types of things as a result of feeling like you don't have a handle over time? And since we have a lag, I'm going to move on to the next slide. But if you guys feel free to share, I'd love to see what the impact is on you guys and make sure that I can address that appropriately for you all. Let me just mention, I think all of you are aware of the program that I created called Mind the Matters. And there's 4 different personality styles. There's the motivator, the investigator, the nurturer, and the director. And if you're familiar with the DISC, this is also based off of the DISC assessment. The D is the director, the I in the DISC is the motivator, the S in the DISC is the nurturer, and the C in the DISC is the investigator. Each personality style actually struggles with their own ability to manage time appropriately. Brad, thanks for sharing. So one of the impacts on you is when you feel like you're not on top of things, is you don't have a chance to review things after each event or after each meeting to make sense of that information. And then that's actually really important to determine what the next steps are. So if you jump into something and then you jump into the next thing and you jump into the next thing, you're not actually making choices throughout the day in terms of what is most important. You're just kind of going with it all, and that'll quickly catch up with you. So based off the personality styles, these are the 4 main areas that people tend to struggle with. And if you look at the way that I've actually organized the webinars, is actually to address these 4 areas. So the first one is prioritizing. A lot of motivators get really excited with doing different activities and being drawn to new type things and being adventurous. And so what ends up happening with them is they jump from one activity to the next activity, but they don't actually feel that they're getting ahead anywhere. So prioritizing the activities are number 1 for them. I am here, Brad. I see that you've asked whether I'm still here. I'm hoping you can still hear me and everybody else can. If something happened and you're not able to hear me, then just let me know and I'll backpedal just a little bit. The second challenge is setting pace. And this tends to be very typical with the investigator style. The investigator style is very particular. They want things to be perfect, and they strive for the highest level of integrity. And they tend to operate at a slower pace than some other people. And so if people put pressure on them to hurry up with certain things, they'll create a lot of resistance for that, or they'll second guess themselves a lot. And that means that they'll end up taking even longer to complete a project. So the 2 we're going to focus on today are prioritizing and pace. The following 2 are boundaries and delegating. Thank you, Eleanor. I'm glad you can still hear me. So I know I'm not just talking to myself. So next week, we're going to talk about boundaries and delegating. Boundaries are very difficult for nurturers. Nurturers want to be helpful. They want to be accommodating. And so they tend to continually take on projects. And even when people interrupt them, they have a very hard time saying no. So next week, we're going to talk about how to set boundaries, how to say no. And then we're also going to cover the importance of delegating. Now, directors do a very good job of delegating, but they oftentimes miss the key component for effective delegation. To effectively delegate, you want to make sure that you give clear instructions on the front end, and then on the back end, you also are able to give them feedback. If you give them lots and lots of instructions on the front end, sometimes they feel like they're clear, but if you don't double check how they did on the back end, they may feel like, well, they don't really care because you haven't bothered to check. Or if you don't give very clear instructions on the front end, but you constantly check up on them to make sure that they're getting stuff done, you might find that people think you're micromanaging. So the skill of delegating is actually really important. So those are the 2 we're going to cover next week, which is boundaries and delegating. And then on the 3rd week, I'm going to go through some specific tips in terms of how you manage your workflow, and also some resources online that you can use to be a little bit more efficient. So let me give you the number 1 skill of time management, and it's called single-minded focus. When I started my business, I asked my dad, who's a successful entrepreneur, what is the one thing that has allowed you to become successful? And he said, single-minded focus. And that stuck with me. And I actually recently read the biography with Steve Jobs. And this is actually one of the things that Steve Jobs talked about, was the importance of single-minded focus. And what we tend to do nowadays is we're on our phones, constantly multitasking. Even if we're sitting watching TV, we might be on our phones. There's people that are on their phones while they're actually eating. There's people that are eating while they're sitting at their desks. We somehow have convinced ourselves that if we can do multiple things at once, we can save time. And the truth is, we don't actually save time. And here's why. You can't possibly give your undivided attention to several things at once. And so when you split your attention, not only are you going to get tired more quickly, but you're actually not going to do as good a job, and studies have proven that, on any one of those activities. So let's say you're having a conversation with someone in your office and you're checking email at the same time, or maybe you're on the phone and checking email at the same time. What will likely happen is you'll increase the likelihood of miscommunication, either with the email you sent or with the telephone conversation, because you're not hearing all of it, or you're not adequately attending to all of it. And then you realize, oh, I missed some information. You ask that person to repeat it, or maybe you send an email without thoroughly reading what was asked of you, and that person has to come back and clarify what they really wanted. And so now you're reading a second email, or somebody else is reiterating what they already said. In both of those instances, you thought you were saving time because you were multitasking, and you end up doing neither of those as effectively. And so you end up having to backpedal, and you end up doing double the amount of work. So the best strategy, if this is all you get from today's class, is whatever it is that you are focusing on, focus on that one thing only. Focus on that until you complete it, and then move to your next thing. This actually is very difficult to gain that level of focus. You have to be completely in the moment, and you almost have to train your mind to be able to focus on one thing and not worry about all of the other things that are going on. Typically, there's 3 productivity killers. The first one is procrastination. And there's actually good procrastination and there's bad procrastination. The second productivity killer is poor planning. And then the third is personal disorganization. Now, if these 3 things are occurring, it's going to be even more difficult for you to gain focus so that you can attend to just that one activity. But let me talk to you about procrastination just a little bit, and the difference between good procrastination and bad procrastination. If I have, let's say I have a potential client that wants to work with me, and I'm going to set up, and they've left me a voicemail that they want to speak with me about my services. And I had my coach that I worked with, this was maybe about 8 years ago, and I had this conversation with my coach, because you would think when I first started my business, if somebody called and said, I'm interested in hiring you, I would instantly call that person back. And actually, I wouldn't. What I found is that I needed to make sure that I was completely focused and prepared to have that conversation. And so I would wait until I was in a good space before I would call that person back, because I wanted to make sure that I really heard what their needs were, and I would be articulate, I would have good energy. And so if I just return the call, let's say while I was driving or I was in between, I don't think I would have made as good of an impression. So a lot of times it would require me to wait until the next day instead of calling at the end of the day, so that I would make a favorable impression. And I remember talking to my coach about that and asking, is that a bad thing? Like, if somebody's interested, shouldn't I call them back right away? And he agreed that you want to make sure that you're handling something when you have the mindset to be able to do that. And so in that case, I would put off calling the client, but that's good procrastination. That's because I'm aware of what's going to give me the biggest impact. And it could be that I would call the client back quicker, not make a favorable impression, and then that would end up just being a waste of my time. So there are certain things that you want to delay by being aware of what's going to make you most effective in what you actually do. Now, bad procrastination is when you need to get something done and you just don't get that done, and you put it off and you put it off until it's really heavy and it just weighs all over you. So that's good procrastination, and that's bad procrastination. Another thing that people tend to do to impact productivity is planning. Here's something that most people don't realize, is that for every minute that you spend planning what you're going to do, you save 10 minutes in execution. Here's why that's critical. If you start your day and you think to yourself, okay, I have this project that I need to tackle. Maybe you need to write a letter, do a proposal, have a conversation with someone. If you spend 1 minute thinking through how you're going to handle that, you'll save 10 minutes when you actually sit down to do it. It's a really good example. I was just meeting with a client just today, and we were talking about, in terms of managing someone, how to give that person feedback. And before you were going to give somebody feedback, you want to figure out what is it that you want to achieve. So if I give this person the feedback, what's my key objective? And if you think for just that 1 minute what you're hoping to achieve, it will focus how to have that conversation. Whereas if you just jump in and have the conversation, it might not be near as effective. So planning has everything to do with how you plan your day, how you plan conversations that you have, how you plan a massive project, all of that. So think through sometimes, what do I need to appropriately plan so that by the time you dive into it, you do a much better job. I have what are called, I believe there's 3 types of people. You have your planners, your procrastinators, and your plungers. Your plungers are people that jump right into a task because they want to get going on it right away. But because they've into it so quickly, they haven't thought through what are all the steps they need to take. And what they find is they have to backpedal on some of the steps because they didn't think through it. So if you jump too quickly, you're going to waste time doing damage control on the back end. If you think through it so much, though, and you get caught up in paralysis through analysis, you'll find that you actually procrastinate a whole lot. But if you give yourself time to plan and you're single-minded, focused on that planning, you'll save yourself an incredible amount of time when you sit down to actually do the activity. So let's take a look at your productivity level. I'm going to ask you guys to share with me in the chat bar a little bit how you feel you're doing on your productivity level. Here's a couple questions that you can ask yourself. Number 1, do you feel like you're able to manage your workload? Here's what's really interesting. I think it's something like 90% of employed people feel that they can't keep up with their workload. 90%. Number 2, are you able to complete your tasks within specific deadlines? If you're struggling with that, with the deadlines, and we'll talk about that next week too, how to set deadlines. Some people do really, really good with deadlines. Other people don't do well with deadlines. If you're somebody who does well with deadlines, one of the best strategies that you can implement is, even if it's a self-imposed deadline, give yourself a limit so that you stay focused on your time frame. Number 3, are you able to keep your email inbox empty? My goal when I check my email is for it to be empty. That's what I'm working towards, is to clear out all my emails so that it's empty. Actually, on Monday, it was completely empty. The whole thing white. And I took a picture of it because that does not happen very often. But there's some people who don't delete emails because they're scared that they're going to need that email later on. They don't know how to appropriately file the emails. And so I have several clients that have thousands upon thousands upon thousands of emails in their active inbox. And that's one of the strategies we're going to talk about in week 3, is how to manage your inbox so that you don't feel like just opening your email, you're overwhelmed by all of that. We've replaced, even though we still have paper, we've replaced all the stacks of papers with an unbelievable amount of emails. And we have to have a system for what do we do with the emails once we get them. And there's some software programs, some apps, and other things that you can use to actually manage that effectively that we'll talk about in week 3. Are you able to keep up with your task list? So do you actually have a to-do list, and are you able to cross things off and feel like you're moving forward? there's nothing worse than having a list of things that you have to do that hangs over your head and you feel like you never have time to actually get it done. So if you're struggling with that, the next conversation on how to prioritize things will be helpful for you. Are you living the life you want? Are you able to locate items quickly? Do you know that the average person spends, I think, an hour a day looking for things? So they've either lost their keys, they can't find a document, maybe they're in their email inbox looking for things, but they're literally wasting an hour a day trying to find something. And the only way to correct that is to create a system where you're organized up front so you can quickly locate things. Eleanor, keeping up with the workload, she said no. Deadlines, yes. Inbox, pitiful. Task list, a mess. Activities, goals, not in sync. Life, yes. Disorganized, and yeah, you need to be able to unplug. You know, Eleanor, if you can keep up with your workload, I mean, if you're having a hard time keeping up with your workload, but you're able to make deadlines, that tells me that you're actually somebody who does well with deadlines. So you're going to want to create deadlines for yourself to keep yourself aware of what to focus on and how much time it should take to get that complete, so that you can check that off your list and stick with your own deadlines versus somebody else imposing it on you. For the inbox, like I said, we'll talk about that in 3 weeks and how to manage that for you, Eleanor. I skipped one, which actually to me is the most important. My day-to-day activities are aligned with my larger goals. We're going to dive into a conversation on prioritizing. And if what you're doing is not in alignment with what your larger goal is, then you're absolutely doing the wrong thing. The tricky thing is being aware of what your goals are so that you know whether or not you're in alignment, and then checking in with yourself throughout the day about whether or not this needs to be something that you're focused on or not. Here's a question that you can ask yourself about how productive your day is. In order to change some of the ineffective habits, we first need to identify them. So think to yourself and be prepared for next week, because this is where we'll dive in next week. And I want everybody to be prepared with what are your 6 least productive activities. So let me give you a couple examples. One of the things that is common for people is when they start their day, the first thing they do is check email. When you check email, you're letting all those other people that have emailed you dictate what's important in your day. So checking email first thing in the morning and throughout the day is actually not a terribly productive activity. You want to be driving what your focus is for the day. And when you're fresh in the morning, your energy should be focused on what's most important first thing in the morning. So email may be something that you find is not terribly productive. One of the things that I do that's not productive, I call it futzing. And futzing is basically where I begin to shuffle papers, I print things out, I organize them, I walk back and forth, and really I just waste a lot of time not really doing anything because I'm not 100% clear on what I need to be doing at that moment. Internet and shopping online, playing games online, those may be some productive activities that, or some non-productive activities that you might be engaging in, and you don't realize how much time it takes. I'm incredibly hesitant about going on Facebook, because if I go on there, I know somebody that actually sets a timer for when they go on Facebook so that they can be aware of how much time they've actually spent, because it's so easy to go on there and then go down the bunny trail, and before you know it, minutes and hours have actually flown by. So think for next week, what are 6 activities that are not terribly productive for you? In order to identify your most productive activities, you want to ask yourself these 3 questions. First, what are your highest value activities? the way that I define this, highest value activities, are what are the activities that are going to lead to money and fulfillment. If it doesn't lead to results for me and my bottom line, or it's not something that I get fulfillment from, it's not my top activity. It might be my second or third, but I'm going to organize my days so that my most valuable activities are always done first. And the way I identify that is which one leads to results and which one leads to fulfillment. Another way to identify your most productive activities and what you should be focused on is ask yourself, what can you do that only you can do that makes a real difference? So even if you delegated it to somebody else, it wouldn't have the same impact. And so it's something that you do that has a big return on investment, either emotionally with your staff, either it produces a really good outcome, but only you can do to make that big difference. That should be one of your high productive activities as well. And then you want to be asking yourself, is this the most valuable use of my time right now? Sometimes it's an important activity, but it's not the right time to be focused on it. And we're going to talk about energy levels in just a minute. So in terms of determining our priorities, there's a model that was created by Stephen Covey out of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And there's 4 different quadrants. There's quadrant 1, which is really important activities and really urgent activities. And those are usually things like phone calls, handling immediate type needs, deadline-driven activities. And then there's quadrant 2. Quadrant 2 is really important activities, but they're not urgent. Now, sometimes people struggle with this quadrant because in this quadrant are things like planning, strategic planning, thinking through what you want to do for your day. Remember, we talked about 1 minute of planning is equal to 10 minutes of execution. So a lot of times, because it's not urgent, quadrant 2 doesn't get the attention it needs. But in reality, if you're going to manage your day, 80% of your activities should be in quadrant 2. 20% should be in quadrant 1. And a lot of times people have it reversed. So they're putting out fires all throughout the day doing crisis management from quadrant 1 because everything is a deadline and has a sense of urgency. And they're not able to take the time to think through what they need to focus on. Quadrant 3 is not important, but it seems urgent. Those are things like the phone is ringing, somebody's asking for your help. They're pretty much unwelcomed interruptions, and they may view it as something that's really urgent, so you attend to it. But in reality, it's not something that's terribly important. And quadrant 4 is not important and not urgent. This is where people tend to play online and do trivial type tasks. This is where I get into futzing with things. It's really not important. It serves no value. It's not incredibly productive, but you're keeping yourself busy to somehow justify that you're doing something. And so quadrant 4 is your biggest waste of time. If you're spending a lot of your time in quadrant 4, you'll find that your relationships with people are going to be strained because people are going to feel like they can't rely on you because you don't follow through. If you're spending the majority of your time in quadrant 1, you're going to feel frantic all the time because everything is going to have a sense of urgency and you're always going to feel behind the 8 ball. So the trick to this is there's a sheet that I'll go through in just a minute where you want to start looking at what you're spending your time on throughout the day. And then with each of those activities, identify, is it quadrant 1, 2, 3, or 4? And if it's in quadrant 1, sometimes there are urgent things that come up and you have to attend to it. You just shouldn't be doing that 50% or 80% of your time. So then if you find that you're spending your time on doing something that seems urgent, ask yourself, what could I do in the future to prevent this? And the minute you ask yourself that question, you're now in quadrant 2, doing planning. And if you ask yourself, what could I do to prevent this in the future? You will be able to effectively shift all the crisis, not all, but the majority of the crisis management from quadrant 1 into quadrant 2. And it kind of goes back to what you were saying, Brad, about at the end of an event, taking the time to review it. If you spend a couple minutes after an event to say, what could I have done differently? What do I need to do next? What's my priority next? You're now spending your time and energy in quadrant 2. And then if you say, you know what, I just did that 3 times already, and that's a complete waste of my time. Let me figure out a way that I only have to do it once and then I can automate it. Again, that's planning, that's quadrant 2, and it gets you out of doing urgent crisis management type stuff from quadrant 1. So the key is not to prioritize what's on your schedule, but to schedule your priorities. So take a look at what's most important. Make sure you're spending the time planning throughout your day, and then attend to those important things. Here's a couple productivity tips in addition to what we already spoke about. Make sure you're focused on what you actually want based off of what's going to produce the highest amount of results, and it's going to be the most fulfilling for you. Write it down, which is one of the key things, is put everything in a list. I know there's people that have one calendar. I had a client that had a calendar on her desk. She had a pocketbook in her purse. She also had a calendar on her phone, and then her boss would keep appointments for her as well. So she didn't have all of her appointments, let alone all of her activities in one place. So make sure you've got everything localized in one place. You should not have multiple calendars unless they all merge into one calendar. Set a deadline and even sub-deadlines. This is important for you, Eleanor. If you're working on a project, break the project down into smaller goals and then set a deadline for when you're going to get those done. Since you work well off deadlines, and you probably do well off that sense of pressure, you actually want to create that more for yourself. And then time management is not about speed, it's about priorities, which that's been the whole focus today, is identifying the most important activities. That's my dog. That's funny. All right. If you've ever heard, there's a book called Eat That Frog. And Eat That Frog was done by Brian Tracy. And basically, it's actually a really good book, but basically the premise is, when you start your day, you want to start your day with the most important element for the day. And he calls that the frog. So take the biggest, baddest, ugliest, nastiest frog, which is the activity that you don't want to do and you don't want to focus on, but it's weighing on you. That should be the first thing that you do in the morning. So he calls that Eat That Frog. Couple other ideas. If you're doing something and you're doing something repeatedly, you might actually want to gain some awareness and ask yourself, why am I doing this? What's the consequence if you don't do it? This goes back to what I was saying. Sometimes I put things on my to-do list, and then I put all this pressure on myself about things need to get done. And then when I look at it and I sit down to do it, it's not even relevant anymore. So be aware of why you're doing certain things and what happens if you don't do it. Will it matter in 5 years? Does it contribute to your goal? Does it impact the bottom line? And do you find it fulfilling? If you're focusing on something and it doesn't meet those criteria, I think it's incredibly suspect that you would continue to focus your energy on that. So let me just talk a little bit about, I like this quote, self-discipline is the ability to make yourself do what you should do, whether you feel like it or not. So that goes back to that Eat That Frog. Let me mention one other thing about how we set our pace. There are certain activities that we're naturally going to find energizing and fulfilling, and there's certain things that we're not. In an average work day, or in an average 24-hour day, we work 8 hours. 2 hours are reserved for leisure, 2 hours for family and friends. We sleep, exercise, eat, chores, personal, and then whatever is miscellaneous. And if you're looking at this, you might seem like in a 24-hour day, all of that just doesn't seem possible. If that's the case, take a look at what are you doing during your work time. How many hours are you working? What are you doing after work? And when are you doing certain things based off your energy level? So if you look at your current energy levels, what am I doing physically that I should be doing more of? What am I doing that I should be doing less of? What should I not do if I start doing something to perform at my best? That sounded kind of confusing. Remember I mentioned if you start your day checking email, that means you're taking your highest energy level for the day and using it on email. The most effective thing, most productive thing should be what you do first thing in the morning. And so you want to be looking at, am I doing what I need to be doing at the right time of day? A lot of times at 2 o'clock and even 3 o'clock, people take a dip. That should not be the time that you're actually focusing on your best activities. That should be the time that maybe you're checking email and doing something that isn't as important as some of the other things. But you've got to be aware of how you manage your energy level so you know what your best time of day is. And here's a way for you to assess this. Over the next week, think to yourself, mornings are the worst time for X. What are afternoons best and worst for? Evenings and late nights. The reason I bring this up is because sometimes people are morning people and sometimes people are late people. And if you get a surge of energy towards the end of the day, then you want to structure your activities that require a lot of mental focus at a later time, because that's when you're at your peak. I'm just going to wrap up with more things that you might find interesting. If you've gotten a full night's sleep, studies have shown that you're 2.5 times more productive. The other thing is, of time management, of all of the things that we say are interfering with our ability to effectively manage time, 80% of them are internal, meaning it's either thoughts we've got going on or we're creating some of our own difficulties, and 20% are external. Most people would like to believe that it's being imposed upon them, but 80% of it is your choice. A couple laws. Number one, Parkinson's law, which is as much time as you allocate to get a project done is as much time as it will take. Here's why that's important, and this goes back to setting deadlines, Eleanor. If you're working on a project and you say to yourself, this really should only take me an hour, if you say that in advance, you'll spend an hour doing it. If you say to yourself, okay, I've got the afternoon to get this done, you'll spend the afternoon. So you want to be very aware of how much time you're allocating for each of the activities. The Pareto principle is the 80-20 rule, which basically says that 80% of your time, 20% of your time leads to the best results. 20%, and that applies to everything. 20% of your clients are going to be the best clients, whereas 80% of your time is not going to be as effective. Brad, I get that you guys have the majority of your work being email. One of the things that you can do if you're just basically sifting through emails all the time is begin to take a look at, first of all, you should be prioritizing the emails. There's FYI emails, there's frivolous emails, and then there's need to get this done. This is really important. So when you go to check your email, even if that's determining your task list, you still want to figure out what is going to be the most productive use of your time and which emails deserve the highest level of priority. You knock out those first, and then you can go back to some of the other ones. This is a little calendar that you guys can use to track. I've had clients that track just a day or two to see where spending their time. It's kind of like tracking calories. You may end up eating things that you don't even realize count as calories. Same things happen with time. So as soon as you track your day, as soon as you track yourself for a day or two, you'll be astonished with where you end up wasting some time. So with that, is there any specific questions that you guys have? And I can answer those now. And next week, we'll talk about what some specific time wasters are, how to set boundaries, and then also how to delegate effectively. For you guys on the webinar right now, what is one thing that you're taking away from today that you're going to try over the next week to see if it makes a difference in how you actually manage your time? So Brad, I know you've got a lot of emails. Eleanor, anything you want to do differently with managing deadlines or prioritizing some of your activities? I know we're on a slight delay, so I'll wait just a minute. And let's go back to the wrap-up slide. Also, if you guys have specific questions that you want to make sure that I address in the next session, just email them to me or type them in the chat, and I'll make sure that I cover them next week too. So any last minute thoughts about what you want to apply today as a result of what we actually covered? I know I threw a lot out there, but now that we're on this system, we'll have a little bit additional time next week because we got started just a little late. Good, Eleanor. I want to look at my 6 unproductive activities. That's fantastic. Most people aren't aware of what is productive, what's unproductive. The way that you can tell, Eleanor, if it's productive or unproductive is to ask yourself, is this leading to my goals? And is it fulfilling to me? If you're doing it just because maybe you've always done it or you feel like you have to, that might not be the best use of your time. Hey, Sarah's on also. Sarah, if you want to put anything in the chat, you can add as well. I don't know why I thought Sarah was with Brad. So any last minute thoughts on what anybody else wants to be able to focus on over the next week? If not, let me flip back to me, and I will say goodbye to everybody. All right, I'm glad we got this all worked out. So at the end of the webinar, I'm going to end it in just a minute, and you should be able to receive an email with the link back. So if I went through anything a little quickly or you want to readdress something, you can always replay it back. And with that, thank you all for participating today, and I will talk to you all next week. Thanks so much. Bye.